There was a lot of revelations that us fans were supposed to make while reading Chapter 9 of Boruto's Two Blue Vortex, and I believe that by and large, both us as readers and me as a content creator have talked on those revelations. See, we now know that Boruto and Kashin Koji's hideout is somehow tied to either Ryuchi Cave or Orochimaru. We know that Himawari is the next Jinchuriki of Kurama, at least kind of. And we know that at least currently, Boruto's karma marking is unusable. And those were the things we were supposed to realize in Chapter 9. However, I also realized something in Chapter 9 somewhat embarrassingly late. Because in Chapter 9, I realized something that I should have realized much sooner. And that was Boruto's pins, or more specifically, the design of Boruto's pins. See, I think we can all agree that Boruto post-time skip has had a substantial glow-up. He's got a cape, a sword, 2 belts, and Sasuke's headband to tie it all together. In the department of showing out, he's doing quite well. However, for the last 8.5 chapters, I've been so caught up in the opulence of the fact that Boruto is wearing 2 belts that over the course of these last 9 chapters, I somehow missed the fact that he was wearing pins on the lapel of his jacket. And even though my brain might have registered at some point, oh, pins under the cape, the shape of the pins and what they're meant to depict definitely never registered. However, while reading Chapter 9, when Boruto returned to the hideout that he shares with Kashin Koji and took off his cape and sat down and thought about what had just happened in Konoha, I, for the first time, realized, oh, pins, and uniquely shaped pins. And as I looked closer at these 4 pins that Boruto was wearing on his lapel, I realized that the symbol of each and every single one of these pins could tie back to another character in Boruto. And thus understanding these pins and the characters they're supposed to invoke could help us understand where Boruto's story is possibly heading. And thus I dove deep into the research of what these pins could possibly be and what they could possibly symbolize, or more specifically, the characters they were supposed to invoke. And I came to 2 very interesting conclusions. That 1, these pins draw a symbolic line to every single person in Boruto's life who really matters to him that may or may not have been affected by omnipotence, and 2, that all of these pins could be marked with flying Raijin marks to make it so when Boruto gives these pins to the person they're supposed to invoke, that Boruto can get to the location whenever it's necessary to either protect them or assist them. And thus, while prior to this realization, these pins seemed like a little bit of a hat on a hat, a minor aesthetic addition made to an already incredibly dripped out character, I now realize that these pins will not only play a massive role in the future of Two Blue Vortex when it comes down to Boruto re-establishing connections with the people he loves most, but also these pins will play a massive role in Boruto protecting those he loves most from threats like the Shinju or possibly Shibai. On top of that, these pins might serve as crucial evidence to help us deduce just how good Boruto is at the usage of flying Raijin, allowing us to possibly once and for all understand why Boruto said he's not as good as his grandpa. Yes, we're gonna deduce all of that just from a couple of pins on Boruto's lapel. Because today, we're talking Boruto's real secret weapon revealed. But before we get to revealing anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me getting way too granular in your favorite anime and manga IP, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other manga and anime. And if you just like the idea of me talking about manga and anime, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see me live, come on down to Comic Palooza in Houston, Texas, Memorial Day weekend. I'm gonna be doing 6 panels talking about Naruto, Boruto, Hunter x Hunter, and how to become an anime YouTuber. It's gonna be a lot of fun, but it'll be even more fun if you're there. Before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, Beam. See, I'm getting old, and one of the worst things about getting old is that somehow it gets harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. But that's where Dream from Beam is coming to my life. See, believe it or not, in order to do this job at a high level, one needs to be relatively rested. So when I wake up in the morning with anything less than a stellar night of sleep, it substantially affects my ability to be on here and be my chipper self talking about anime, which is why I've introduced Dream into my life. And ever since starting Dream, I've fallen asleep faster, stayed asleep longer, and woke up feeling more refreshed, which makes me substantially more attentive and more excited for my workday. See, Dream is is a luxurious drink blend filled with the highest quality sleep-promoting ingredients, and it is clinically shown to improve your sleep. With ingredients like melatonin, magnesium, and L-theanine, this 30-day supply makes sure that for a whole month I fall asleep and stay asleep the way I want to. But this, the Founders Blend, isn't the only option to help you fall asleep at night, as they also have a CBD version. On top of the fact that it helps me fall asleep and stay asleep, the flavors are also incredible. And this is my go-to flavor right here, chocolate peanut butter. But don't just listen to me. Clinical studies have shown that 93% of people who use the CBD version of Dream report getting better, more rested sleep. That's pretty good numbers. So what are you guys waiting for? Use the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen right now and use code NCHammer to get 35% off your order of Dream today. It's time to catch the Z's we all deserve. So, in order to break down what these pins could possibly mean for the future of Boruto, and possibly, more importantly, for the future of Boruto's loved ones, we're first gonna have to break down exactly what these pins are. See, while we've never necessarily had what I would consider a great look at all 4 of the pins simultaneously, and we probably won't get a great look at all of these pins simultaneously until Boruto hands these pins out to the people he loves. By gathering all the drawings we have of Boruto's cape flowing in different directions that allow for the pins to be seen even for 1 or 2 panels, it's fairly obvious to see that Boruto is wearing a Konoha leaf pin, a sun pin, a lightning pin, and possibly an Omamori pin. See, because while the internet has all but agreed that Boruto is wearing Konoha's symbol in a leaf pin, a sun pin, and a lightning bolt pin, the 4th pin, the possible Omamori pin, is kind of up in the air. But we do know for certain that Boruto is wearing 4 pins total, which rather conveniently aligns with the fact that Boruto has left 4 people behind in Konoha that he deeply loves: Sarada, Mitsuki, Himawari, and Kawaki. And yes, Boruto does still have love in his heart for Kawaki. He is truly his father's son, because even though Boruto slumped Kawaki in Chapter 9, he's already established to the likes of Mitsuki that he would like to reconcile the differences between him and his brother as brothers, going so far as to say that this battle between Kawaki and Boruto is just a squabble between siblings, and that Boruto would like to see Kawaki so that he could punch him as a brother and get over this whole omnipotence nonsense. So yes, Kawaki should absolutely be considered in the fold of people that Boruto wants to mend relationships with. And while one could absolutely make the argument that Boruto has way more than 4 people he would like to mend relations with, as the list of 4 people that I just said very noticeably doesn't include Shikadai, Sumire, Inojin, or Chocho, if we're being real with ourselves, they're not important to the story, and they're certainly not important enough to deserve a pin on Boruto's lapel. See, because from a character design perspective, 4 pins is already pushing it. See, because any more than 4 pins is gonna make Boruto look like an anime fan's corkboard. If Boruto's walking around with 8+ pins that are all symbolically tied to a character from Konoha, it would be too obvious who the pins were for. And since Kishimoto is truly trying to be as mysterious as possible in the writing of Boruto, a lesson he learned from writing Naruto, which wasn't all that mysterious, 4 pins was still too many, because people like me were able to notice. And thus people like me are sitting here and making videos spoiling what will be a touching moment of Boruto handing a leaf symbol to Sarada and so on and so forth. But it still took me 9 chapters to come to that conclusion. If Boruto was walking around clinking from 8+ pins, I would have came to that conclusion much sooner. Anyways, now that we've established why Boruto wears 4 pins as opposed to any amount other than 4, let's talk about why the pins are the symbols that they are. Starting with the most obvious pins and working our way down to the most hotly contested ones. That is to say that the internet agrees on a couple of pins, what they mean and who they'll be given to, and they don't agree on a couple of other ones. So let's start with the most obvious pin, the pin seemingly everybody seems to agree with, both in its meaning and who Boruto is gonna give it to. And that pin is the Konoha leaf pin. See, like I've already stated, there isn't a pin on Boruto's lapel for Sumire. And between that fact and the hug that Sarada and Boruto exchanged a couple of chapters ago, that should be all the evidence you need to deduce the fact that there is no love triangle at play in Boruto, unless you count Mitsuki, who I would argue has a better chance at ending up with Boruto than Sumire does. At least Boruto's wearing a pin for Mitsuki. Now I bring this up because the leaf pin is very obviously for Sarada, who has the dream above anything else of becoming the Hokage one day. And thus the leaf symbol of Konoha that Boruto wears on his lapel is meant to symbolize that dream of Sarada's. On top of this, Boruto, rather subliminally, also wears this pin on his left lapel, the only one he wears on that side, and he wears it over his heart, which is once again a dagger in the hearts of those who want him to end up with Sumire. But those who do want him to end up with Sumire could make the argument that Boruto wears this leaf symbol over his heart to display to the world that he's still loyal to Konoha, which is possibly done to counteract the fact that he is constantly walking around with a rogue Konoha shinobi headband that he got from Sasuke. Kind of a mixed signal being sent here. But because this is the only headband that Boruto has access to, and because he respects Sasuke, he's gotta show the world that he's loyal to Konoha some other way. And thus Boruto wearing the leaf pin to symbolize his loyalty to Konoha is a possible explanation as to why he wears it. And there is technically a bland Boruto is wearing this pin for himself explanation for every single one of these pins. And we're gonna be going over those bland, though slightly more realistic explanations as to why Boruto is wearing these pins simultaneously while we go over the fact that Boruto might be wearing these pins to give them to the people he loves in Konoha. Because you gotta take the good with the bad. And unfortunately, when it comes down to the leaf pin, the boring side's got some pretty compelling evidence to back it up. Because if we do go with the line of logic that Boruto was going to give this leaf symbol to Sarada when they re-established their bonds, you could very easily make the argument that Boruto and Sarada have already done that, and in that moment, he didn't give her the leaf pin. Because Boruto returned to Konoha, and he met with Sarada, who was very clearly not affected by omnipotence, something Boruto should have already known because Sasuke would have told him how he got broken out of omnipotence. And thus Boruto and Sarada had a moment to catch up with each other, where they shared a very touching hug. And yet in that moment, Boruto doesn't reach for his lapel, pull off a pin, and give it to Sarada, even though she established that she missed him and that she wanted him to come back to the village. However, there is two possible explanations as to why Boruto wouldn't give her his pin in that moment. One, Mitsuki interrupted their moment with a snake hug that Boruto had to hip thrust his way out of, or two, Boruto still feels guilty about Sasuke's fate at the mouth of a claw grind, and how if Boruto wasn't there, Sasuke wouldn't have been forced into this position. And thus it's a possibility that Boruto won't truly feel as though he can face Sarada like he used to face Sarada until he saved Sasuke's life. Kind of like a reparation for what he feels responsible for what happened to Sarada's father. But enough about the leaf pin, let's talk about the second most obvious pin, at least to me, but the contentiousness does start right here. See, because to me, the second most obvious pin is the sun pin, which I believe is meant to go to Himawari, whose name in Japanese translates directly to sunflower. And therefore, if the sun pin should go to anyone, it should be Himawari. And thus, since chapter 10 has a pretty fair shot of Boruto scooping Himawari away from Jura, reuniting the brother and sister as Boruto is the only person on Earth strong enough to protect Himawari from the likes of Jura, that means starting in chapter 10, assuming that Himawari isn't stolen by Jura and eaten, that the only logical person that Himawari will be spending the rest of Two Blue Vortex with is Boruto. And because of this, we could see Himawari receiving her sun pin from Boruto as soon as chapter 10. However, there is a lot of sun symbology in Boruto, as obviously Mitsuki has his two sun situation between Boruto and Kawaki. Sarada's got a sun-shaped MS that hypothetically is built to counter Ada's moon-shaped Senrigan, and Himawari's name literally means sunflower. So you could pretty easily make the argument that the sun pin should go to Mitsuki, Himawari, or Sarada, though most only make the argument for either Mitsuki or Himawari. But here's the thing, I don't think Boruto would give the sun pin to Mitsuki, because that would be kind of weird. Like, yes, obviously we had the moment in chapter 7 where Boruto told Mitsuki that he is his son. Super touching, super cool, claps all around. But it feels though the more important takeaway from that conversation is the fact that Boruto and Mitsuki came to the conclusion that Mitsuki doesn't need a son. And thus, if Boruto were to give a sun pin to Mitsuki, it would kind of feel contradictory to that sentiment. It also feels a bit onery. Like, hey, I'm your son, so wear this sun pin. And when you consider what sun means in Mitsuki's eyes, which is more akin to an idol or somebody they follow, Boruto being like, yeah, that's me, make sure you wear this at all times, it's a bit odd. Now, the unfun explanation as to why Boruto is wearing a sun pin is that Boruto decides to go even weirder than giving Mitsuki the sun pin and says that Boruto wears the sun pin because he believes he's Mitsuki's son, which would just be psychotic in my mind. Which is why, personally, I believe it's much more likely that the bolt pin is actually what's meant for Mitsuki, as he's well known for his proficiency in lightning release, using moves like Snake Lightning as his base move. However, some people believe that the lightning bolt pin is meant for Himawari, because Boruto's name, and some of you may not actually know this, isn't a real Japanese name. Nobody in Japan is named Boruto. I mean, maybe now they are, but Not before, because Boruto isn't even a Japanese word. Naruto was. Naruto is fish cake that you put into your ramen, but Boruto is not a Japanese word. The name Boruto is actually based off how Japanese people pronounce the English word bolt, as in lightning bolt, or the electric dog, because Japanese people pronounce the English word for bolt Boruto, or if you say it fast, Boruto. Because 1, there's no L in the Japanese language, and 2, there's no straight T, as the letter T is usually followed by a vowel, like E, A, or O. So when Japanese people say the word bolt in English, it comes out Boruto. And thus Himawari, who loves her brother through any form of adversity, should receive the pin that symbolizes him. But this line of logic doesn't sit right with me because I believe you could make the same argument for Mitsuki, who on top of definitely wanting a bolt that symbolizes Boruto, also is known for using lightning release. It works twice. And the non-fun explanation of why Boruto wears a lightning bolt pin is because he's wearing a pin that symbolizes his own name, and is also, like Mitsuki, very well practiced in lightning release, going so far as to use Kakashi's purple lightning in the battle against Mitsuki. But that brings us to our last pin, which is by far and away the most hotly contested in terms of what it is and who it's for, on account of the fact that we really haven't gotten a good look at it. And the looks that we have gotten at it just make it kind of look like a hexagon of sorts. However, the opinion that the majority of people online seem to agree on is that this fourth pin is an omamori, or a luck/protection charm that's sold at Shinto and Buddhist temples all throughout Japan. It's the kind of thing that you buy for your loved ones and you tie to their backpack or their cell phone. And by having this luck/protection charm on them from either a Buddhist or a Shinto temple, they will be luckier or more protected. And thus, because the other 3 pins seem to have clear connections to the other 3 people in Konoha that Boruto loves most dearly, by default, people have kind of come to the conclusion that the omamori must be for Kawaki, because Boruto wants to protect him, which might actually make sense. But you consider the fact that the reason that Kawaki drove Boruto out of Konoha in the first place is because he believed that Boruto posed an inherent threat to Naruto, their father, and thus if Boruto can convince Kawaki and the rest of Konoha that he can protect them, then Boruto giving Kawaki a pin that symbolizes Boruto trying to protect Kawaki would be appropriate. But you could also make the argument that Boruto would want luck and protection for quite literally every other person on this list, possibly including himself, because the unfun explanation as to why Boruto would be wearing an omamori is that he's wearing it for luck, which is something that a ton of Japanese people do, so it makes a fair amount of sense. But outside of trying to mend lost connections to the people he loves still in Konoha, is there any other reason that Boruto would want to give these 4 pins to the 4 people he loves the most? And the answer to that question is yes. It's also because he wants to protect them. See, in Chapter 4, after Code had fled back to the Car Dimension after being hit with the Rasengan Uzuhiko, Boruto followed him there by jumping to a toad that he had placed on Code's person. But something that I, for some reason, didn't realize in Chapter 4 was holding onto Boruto's leaf symbol pin, which leads me to believe that Boruto didn't mark the toad or Code, but instead the pin that he gave to the toad. And if we go with this line of logic, it would make sense that Boruto has marked all the pins that he wears with flying Raijin marks. And therefore, when he gives these pins to people in his life who he finds important and they wear them, he'll be able to jump to the location whenever he wants to. But this leaves us with the massive question of, okay, but why wouldn't he just mark them, or the toads, or Code? And quite honestly, we don't have an answer to that question, but we can deduce that that would be substantially more convenient. But since we're able to identify that that would be substantially more convenient, and yet Boruto doesn't do it for some reason, we can pretty logically come to the conclusion that there's something stopping Boruto from being able to do that. Because even as recently as Chapter 9, Boruto returned to Konoha through the medium of jumping to a toad that was holding a triangle symbol. And while when I was reading this chapter and doing a breakdown on the chapter, I thought this was odd, but also thought it might be a way for Kashin Koji to help Boruto know where to jump by differentiating the toads from each other. There's better ways to differentiate the toads than have them holding a shape. In fact, the toads could just have names, and Boruto could have marks on the toads. And yet, for some reason, Kashin Koji and Boruto are having toads use one out of their 2 good arms to hold a shape that denotes who they are. And what I've now realized is that Boruto wasn't jumping to the toad, but the triangle itself. Which means that when Boruto said, "I'm not talented like my grandfather at using Flying Thunder God," he probably wasn't referencing his jumping ability, but rather his marking ability. As we all know, Minato was able to leave his flying Raijin marks on anything or anybody he touched in a matter of seconds, which is what made Minato such a terrifying threat, because Minato could have flying Raijin marks all over a battlefield with ease. And it's actually why flying Raijin was considered a kinjutsu when Minato used it, because the second that Minato was able to get a flying Raijin mark on somebody, they were as good as dead, because at any moment for the rest of their life, Minato could appear next to them and stab him in the neck. But Boruto is seemingly unable to do this, because otherwise he would. Boruto came into contact with Code. If he could have marked Code, he would have done it in that moment, but instead he smuggled a toad onto Code's body that was holding a pin, when Boruto also could have just marked the toad that he put on Code, which means that Boruto may be unable to mark living things. Or possibly because the toads are cyberware toads created by Amado, they're unable to be marked. But that would leave us with the question of why doesn't he mark his friends? Why give them a pin that they may or may not wear? And the only real conclusion outside of he doesn't want to breach their privacy, which is silly, is that he's unable to. To which some people will retort, but Boruto has a mark on Code. That's how he was able to appear on Code's face in chapter 1. But that's absurd, because if he had a mark on Code, he wouldn't have had to smuggle a toad onto Code. And he would have found the 10 tails not only much easier, but also much earlier. And thus the pins and their connection to Boruto's loved ones not only tell us that Boruto's gonna try and mend all the relationships that are currently broken, but also give us our best ever possible look in to how Boruto is able to use flying Raijin, truly once and for all cementing to us, at least currently, what his level of mastery is over his grandfather's jutsu. But I'm curious as to what you guys think. Who do you believe these pins are supposed to go to? And do you believe my synopsis on Boruto's usage of FTG is accurate? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I am gonna go to Mexico to rave for 3 days.